Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Johnny's Ambassadors Expert Webinar Series. We have an incredible faculty member with us today, Debbie Berndt, whom I will introduce in just a moment. I want to let you know she has provided an incredible handout with a link to a survey that she would love for you to take at the very end of this session. Also, links to some educational resources. So make sure to get that in the handout. And if you're listening to this as a recording, it is on the website page where you can download that list of resources. Debbie will take some questions from you afterward, which I will read to her. So please enter them into the question box, which is in your GoToWebinar control panel. And we're going to kick off with a poll. And first, I would like to tell you a little bit about Debbie. Debbie Berndt has worked with the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, or SAMHSA, a division of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as a marijuana subject matter expert on several of their projects, and now hosts the podcast, What Parents Are Saying, which is part of the nationally recognized Talk, They Hear You prevention campaign for parents. She's also the director for Parent Movement 2.0 and Substance-Free Athletics, both educational programs designed to assist in reducing underage substance use through highly targeted curriculum and messaging. And she is a co-creator of the One Choice 5 framework for parents, which she is here to discuss with us today. Debbie, welcome to Johnny's Ambassadors.
Thank you, Laura. It's so great to be here, always with you and with everyone here.
I would mention too that you are a member of our advisory council.
Absolutely. So another proud moment for me as well.
I'm going to launch this poll that we have here. If you would please click on your screen all of these that describe you. Debbie would love to know if you are a parent of a 12 to 25-year-old, a grandparent. Do you work in prevention, work in education, or work in medicine and research? So we'll give you just a few seconds to click on your screen and complete this quick poll for us. This will give Debbie some information on who you are and what might be relevant to you as she begins her talk. Okay, this looks like here to me, Debbie, that you have lots of parents, 45, nearly half are parents, and nearly 30% grandparents, and almost, wow, 82% are in prevention and about a quarter in education. So great, smart group with us today.
Great, perfect. It's always good to know who we're talking to.
I'll take myself off webcam and take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's see. I need to shrink my little mirror. Okay. Hey, everybody. How are you? So it's great to be here. The topic we have is a 21st century understanding of marijuana and prevention using what we're calling the One Choice 5, which is a new prevention framework for parents. And this is a pretty big title and a pretty big topic. And the reason we're having this conversation is because there's been about 2 or 3 decades worth of scientific research, social science, and data analysis that has uncovered the biomechanics of all the drugs we use recreationally and otherwise, and has profoundly changed the way we understand brain development. Unfortunately, if you're not in this space, either of prevention or substance science, most people are completely unaware of all of this new understanding, and that includes parents. And of all the groups that probably should understand this information, parents are probably the most important. So we're going to dive in and bring everybody up to date. And to start in its most simple terms, all of this research has been summarized into a new health standard. Let's see if I can get this to work. And we're clicking. Okay. Let's see if I can do it manually.
You might need to.
Did the screen change?
Yes, looks great.
Oh, okay, great. So this new health standard is no use of any substances when you're young, really until 21, for reasons of health. So if we say that really fast, it doesn't even really sound like that much. But if we think about it, and especially if we're a parent, it's a little daunting. Really, no use, not even a beer in high school. So we want to break this down. And to get started, we want to offer that this is a health standard just like other health standards that we have in society today. And seatbelts and helmets are particularly relevant. For most of us who are parents, at least of high school kids, we didn't wear helmets and we didn't wear seatbelts when we were in middle school and high school, at least in the 1980s. But they're imperative today. And the reason is because of the decades of scientific research and social science and data analysis and experience that has proven that helmets and seatbelts keep our kids safe. In fact, they help them get to adulthood alive and unharmed. And when most of us have adopted these standards really without much question, and most of us insist that our kids are wearing both of these. Now, to be fair, we recognize that substance use, especially when you're in high school and have high school kids, can be a little bit harder. And there's an amazing organization called the Institute of Behavior and Health that has a curriculum called One Choice that talks about making that one choice not to use with teens. And I've worked with them, had the pleasure to work with them over the last year to kind of translate that message into this framework for parents. And we call that the One Choice 5, Prevention Basics for Parents, to help parents think about prevention and integrate its importance in a practical way into their lives. The framework starts by recognizing that drug and alcohol use by young people is not inevitable. Most parents tend to think that it's a given. The One Choice 5 encourages parents to become brain development savvy. Brain-based parenting is a real opportunity today, and it's good to know as much as possible. We also need to become substance savvy. Our kids are exposed to a lot and generally know more about drugs than we do, even if what they understand is incorrect, because there is a tremendous amount of misinformation out there. We'll focus on marijuana today. Then fourth, parents need to talk early and talk often with their kids about drugs and alcohol. And lastly, we need to act quickly if we suspect use. That, oh, kids will be kids kind of response to a crazy night out is really kind of a dated response. So we'll go into a little bit more detail of all of these, but first, let me just say that this framework is available on the IBH website or One Choice website. The framework is meant to be a progressive tool. So each of the 5 points are explained in higher levels of detail, and then a parent can drill down into each point as they need to or want to. And what they find there is a highly created, a highly curated set of additional resources that represent some of the best data and information and organizations in the field. So getting started, or let me just also say, if you're in a coalition and are wanting to hand this information out, there are also flyers and that sort of thing on the website as well. So we get started with this first point, that is youth substance use is actually not inevitable. And that can be hard to accept as true, especially because we think and we hear all kinds of things like kids need to learn how to drink responsibly before they go to college, and they'll be left out socially if they don't use at the party, or I know they're going to use, so I'd rather them use at my house, or I used when I was young and I'm fine and it's just a beer. What is the big deal? So these notions are really kind of deeply seated beliefs for so many of us, including myself. And there's a really fascinating reason why. And it's based on this crazy fact that kids today use less than we used when we were in high school, if you can even get your head wrapped around this. This is MIDA, which is one of the two major public health studies that have been going on for decades and really inform alcohol. And this chart is showing from the mid 1970s, if I can get my little mouse over there, down to the early 2020s. Drug use of all kinds have been going down: alcohol, cigarette, illicit drugs, with the exception of marijuana, which kind of bottomed out in the early 90s and has been progressing upwards ever since, which really just, follows the legalization trends in our country. But all drug use among high school seniors, that's what you're looking at, has gone down. Now, except for marijuana. But the interesting thing is they use very differently than we used as well. And that's something to know. So that 6-pack of beer shows up now as a handle of vodka to the party. There are canned beverages that have 4 and 5 beers worth of alcohol in them in one can. The weed today is supercharged in so many different ways, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Vaping nicotine kind of showed back up off all of our radar screens. Nobody was aware that was going on. And that allows people, kids in particular, to consume a pack of cigarettes and less puffs than it takes to actually consume a real pack of cigarettes. And then we have this general ethos that a pill can solve anything in our culture. And that's seeping into the entire society as well. So another thing that's interesting about this, if we can flip this chart and look at non-use among high school seniors. So this is the exact same data, just flipped. And what you're seeing, again, most of us were in high school in the 1980s and 1990s. And this chart always makes me laugh because this very low point is 1983. That is the year I graduated from high school. And in that year, 3% of us, high school seniors, had never used alcohol, marijuana, or any drug. 3. So it's 97% of us used. Yes, those are my people. This line above is use in the past 30 days. So in 1983, it was 16% total had not used in the last 30 days. So look forward, the very right side of the chart, and today we have 36% of high school seniors who have never drank, smoked, or drugged. It's inconceivable, right? I mean, it's 10 times higher. 10 times more kids are not using. And when we add those kids that haven't used in the last 30 days, we're at 63% of kids that haven't used in the last 30 days. It's remarkable. But you can also see the conundrum, right? How do I impose as a parent a different standard on my kids today when I used when I was in their situation? Well, the very simple answer to that is we can. Call it hypocrisy if you want to, 12-year or 16-year-old daughter, but there are 2 different standards of behavior for some very real reasons that we'll talk about today and that most of us here probably already know. Sorry, to get my slides going. And so that takes us to the second point, which is be brain development savvy. And this is actually very exciting. We know so much today. We know that the brain is this learning, adaptive organ that grows and matures through feedback that you get all day long. You walk into a room, you get into an uncomfortable situation, you get in your car, you drive to school, you learn some stuff. Everything you're doing all day long, no matter who you are, is giving you feedback, and that feedback is shaping your brain. This makes your brain the repository of how you understand the world and how you understand yourself in it. This last point here, the brain that you go to bed with tonight is not the same brain you woke up with this morning, is so interesting to think about and talks about the elasticity of the brain. The other thing to know regarding the brain is there's 3 major components to it. We have in the center, or the brain stem, or the reptilian brain, which houses all of our core bodily functions, our deep primal instincts. Am I safe? Do I have enough to eat? Is anything going to hurt me? Wrapped around that is the limbic system, more emotional part of the brain. Do I feel cared for? Do I trust? Where do I fit? How do I belong? And then wrapped around that is the prefrontal cortex, which is all that executive function, higher thinking, impulse control, self-awareness. Here's why parents need to understand this. From 12 to 17, the focus of neurological development is in the limbic system. So if we did an MRI on any of our kids that are 12 to 17, their limbic systems would just be lit up, on fire, process, laying down tracks, growing. When they turn 18, the limbic system calms down and the prefrontal cortex goes off, and it's the same thing, just, tons of development, tons of growth. And a brain's then considered kind of fully developed around 26. But if the neurological development from 12 to 17 is in the limbic system, that means the executive function is not fully developed yet. It's why we have to keep parenting. Our kids are highly emotional. They don't have that rational brain to come online and to help temper some of that emotion. And they rely on us to be their prefrontal cortexes for quite a while. So again, think about it from a parent perspective. If you've ever looked at your teenager and gone, oh my God, do you not have a brain in your head? This is what's happening. If you've ever had a conversation with them and they turn around the next day and do the exact opposite of what you talked about, this is part of what's happening. They just aren't completely there yet with their prefrontal cortexes. It's important to know as a parent, right? Because you understand what you're looking at. So circling back to alcohol and drugs, we also know that those are very complicated neurologically, and kids that are 12 to 17 just literally do not have the brain capacity for it. We also know that kids' brains get injured more easily than adult brains. And it's so fascinating because it's just the opposite of like muscle tissue. If you've ever had a kid sprain an ankle, it's like they're back on the field in 15 minutes. If I sprain my ankle, it is a month or two before I'm really back. And so we think kids just heal quicker. Well, they do there, but on neural tissue, it's exactly the opposite. If a kid gets a concussion, it usually takes them longer for their brain to heal. And it's probably because of all this neurodynamicness that's going on. Speaking of that, and really focusing on the teen brain, there's two major things happening from 12 to 18. One is called neural pruning. The other is called myelination. Kids show up to puberty with a brain that looks like the one on the left. Over the next 6 to 7 years, they end up with the brain that looks like the one on the right, with these robust, efficient circuits for processing information quickly and effectively. They lose circuits that they don't need anymore, or they lose circuits that they don't use anymore. So that's why they say you gotta study languages when you're younger, because if you don't, your circuitry for language acquisition gets pruned away during this process. And it doesn't go entirely, but again, your just capacity gets reduced. So what kids spend time on 12 to 18 gets myelinated in. And so what are they spending time on? Hopefully it's things like jump shots and algebra and friendships and music and relationships and those kinds of things that they're becoming more expert in. Notably, if they spend a lot of time drinking and drugging, that can get myelinated in as well. This next idea I love, and it's the adolescence, for all its messiness, brings major opportunity from a brain standpoint. If we better understand that about our kids, we can just parent a little bit more effectively. So one thing to know is, again, neurologically, they are focused on things like fit and belonging and trust. And doesn't that explain so much about peer influence and peer pressure? Kids are exploring how they fit socially. And again, just knowing that as a parent can lessen the stress and make us a little bit more creative. Instead of your friends are the worst, or you need better and different friends, as parents, we can insert other ideas that express belonging, family history, church, the community, service, a way to be engaged in their lives and in their world. The other thing that I love is that they are really supposed to be developing strategies for coping and connecting and handling stress and building intimacy and problem solving and having fun. And if we understand that, we just, again, understand what we're watching. That executive function is starting to level up. And here's the good news about this. If our kids can show up to the challenges and the opportunities of adolescence, meaning sober and without intoxicants, so much of this learning starts and develops organically. one of the things Laura didn't say in my bio is I am also a parent of 3. I have a 27, 24, and 19-year-old. That's an 8-year spread. And that means I was a high school parent for 12 years. And so I come to this personally and professionally, but one of the things, towards the end, I really couldn't go to any more parent education nights. It had been 12 years of it. I didn't want any more do's or don'ts. I just didn't. At some point in time, my organic ability to parent, my kids' organic ability to grow up with some help has to be enough. And this is good news to me because this says, really, all I really need to do is keep my kids away from drugs and alcohol or help them navigate away from them. And a lot of their growing and how to mature and how to become an adult is going to come online more organically. One more point about that, an executive function. These in the red box are the executive functions that are starting to grow in middle and high school and continue until 25. So the abstract conceptual reasoning, impulse control, problem solving, decision making, judgment, emotional regulation, frustration tolerance, the ability to feel empathy. These are the things that shape us into thinking, feeling, doing, fully self-supporting adults. They're acquired through experience and risk taking. And this is what gets arrested when our kids are drinking and drugging young. And so like I said, there's this idea of brain-based parenting now that the more we can learn about it, the more fascinating it is. And you can start to praise your kids when you start to see them exhibit these types of skills, little things. Oh, I like how you paused for a moment before you responded to your friend. Seems like you really thought that through. Or you really took that other person's feelings into account when you did X, Y, or Z. So it's just I think the brain piece is just an exciting piece, and the more we know, the better. So moving on, though, to number 3, becoming substance savvy is super important, and we like to start with some general notes. And the first thing is that all substance use is related in young people, okay? That's the general topic. I'm going to explain to you why. First of all, marijuana is a gateway drug. No matter what anyone else is saying today, it is. And we know it for a lot of reasons. One of the reasons I find most compelling is that cannabinoids, which is what are in marijuana that make you high, and opioids, which is the chemical compound in heroin, ride on the same superfamily of neural processors, G protein receptors. That means if your brain is one that's going to want more and more and more once you start using cannabis, the step off to opioids is right there. You have primed your brain for it. You have opened the gateway for it. But that said, for teens, we now understand the 3 majors are gateway drugs as well. So alcohol, marijuana, nicotine, all addictive, easily accessible, and the teen brain is especially vulnerable to them. Also, statistically, we see that the use of one of these increases the likelihood or the use of the other 2 plus illicit drugs. This is data from the other major public health study, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, that's been going on for decades, that is massive sample, big sample sizes that tell us how kids are using. And this looks at kids, 12 to 17-year-olds, who say they have not used marijuana use on the left, and then kids who say, yes, I did use marijuana use on the right. And we see that the kids on the left use less of the other drugs than the kids on the right. So in this one, we see that kids who do use marijuana are 5.5 times more likely to drink than their counterparts that don't use marijuana. They're 8 times more likely to binge drink, and binge drinking is 4 or 5 drinks in a sitting. They are 15 times more likely to report heavy alcohol use, which is 4 or 5 binge sessions in a month. And that's not a huge number, but it's a massive multiplier. They're 9 times more likely to smoke cigarettes if they use marijuana. And they are 10 times more likely to use illicit drugs like heroin, cocaine, Molly than their friends that don't use marijuana. So you can see that connection in that substance, and it's true for all of them. This is alcohol. Less use of alcohol means less use of marijuana, cigarettes, and other illicit drugs. More use of alcohol means more use of those things. And it increases because there's 3 levels of alcohol use. So the more alcohol use the more the other drugs you use. So you see this direct relationship. Same with cigarettes. No cigarettes, less use. Yes, cigarettes, more use. The other thing we know is that normalization increases substance use among kids. And normalization is how society makes drugs and alcohol products and their use normal in our culture. It's by the way we all talk as the adults in their lives. It's by our own use. It's depictions in all the media, so many massive messages that our kids are getting, and whether drugs are legal or not. It changes environmental protective factors like access and visibility and perception of harm. And most people, certainly parents, don't realize that there are environmental protective factors out there. Like if we can keep access to drugs down and the perception of harm high, it protects our kids. Normalization in general and legalization specifically also smash these protective factors, which leads to immediate psychological shifts. So the minute any state legalizes marijuana, the whole zeitgeist goes from, it's probably not that great for me, to, it's probably not that bad for me. They made it legal. Everyone, of every age does that. It also changes the calculus of drug use. Marijuana use goes from this kind of small group, individual decision to use. Are we going to? Do we have enough money? Who's got a supplier? Do we have a car? To this, massive social encouraged or media encouraged directive to use. And for any of you in marketing out there, the amount of feature and benefit language and imagery that accompanies commercialization is just staggering. And it promotes this normalization. So let's jump into marijuana, and I'm going to just kind of run through this as fast as we can. We're focused on this obviously because it's 420. We know that's the unofficial national, marijuana celebration day, and we always want to give kids in particular and those that work with them, parents and otherwise, a perspective on this drug. Because again, so much research over the last couple of years, we know so much about it, and nobody seems to. Okay, so we start out by just making sure everyone understands marijuana, weed, cannabis, pot, those are all the same words. They mean the same thing. Cannabis is the Latin name. This plant contains cannabinoids, which are chemical compounds that cause different types of things to happen in the user. THC, delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol is the one that makes you high, CBD, cannabidiol, we hear a lot about, and hemp we now hear about, which is supposed to be a low THC cannabis plant. And then everyone needs to understand that marijuana sits in this drug class called psychotogenics, a little bit by itself. There's 1 or 2 other minor drugs in there. And those drugs cause psychosis, delusion, delirium, auditory and visual hallucinations, which is the distortion of time and space. Find this so ironic. Drugs that are in the hallucinogenic category or hallucinogens, they typically cause mostly visual hallucinations. So you get both when you're using psychotogenics. To understand marijuana, we need to understand the endocannabinoid system. It's made up of CB1 and CB2 receptors. You have them all over your entire body. And this cool fact, our bodies manufacture their own cannabinoids when they need that system to run properly. There's several of them. We're hearing a lot more today about anandamide. As we said a minute ago, THC is a cannabinoid and it runs on that endocannabinoid system as well. And when THC is introduced to the body, it competes with anandamide for that endocannabinoid system. You can see the molecular similarities of these 2 compounds, which means they both fit into those endocannabinoid receptors. However, when there is so much more THC than there is anandamide, THC always wins. So it knocks anandamide off and takes over that system. Lots of kids, adults as well, will ask, well, if THC is doing something that my brain and body are already doing naturally, doesn't that make it better for me or okay for me? And The short answer is no. The longer answer is because of homeostasis. Your brain is always seeking balance, and so it has to respond when it gets inundated with too much THC. One of the things that it does is it will start shutting off the receptors on the receiving side of a brain cell. So that looks like this because it's a real physiological event. You have anandamide that goes across the top of a brain cell, crosses the synaptic gap, gets picked up on the other side, cycles on through the brain. And this is an MRI of what that looks like. This is THC going across the top of the brain cell, crossing the synaptic gap, running into these shut down receptors and kind of stumbling on through the brain. And this is an MRI of that dysfunctional process. Those dark spots are not holes, but they're where neural activity and the corresponding blood flow have slowed way down to those parts of the brain. So is this a big deal? What does the endocannabinoid system do? Well, lots of things. But if we look at the brain, we see 6 areas that have massive amounts of CB1 and CB2 receptors, which tells us anandamide is really needed in those regions of the brain for proper function. Those 6 regions govern memory, movement, and motivation. I always like to do an example. I'll just run through it really quick. If a kid has, or any of us have a thought, go catch that ball. It sparks in the frontal lobe, which is one of those regions. It's held in working memory for a moment while the brain runs to the hippocampus. The second region pulls everything it knows about catching a ball, brings it back, and the basal ganglia, third region, uses that information to organize the body to take that action. Once that action's happening, the cerebellum gets involved to refine the motor skills, angle, speed, that kind of thing to finish the action. It's also where all your balance comes from. So it's a big deal about how the system manages physical movement. It's a big deal. The 5th area is the amygdala, which is a very emotional processing center, connection, excitability, awe. It's where our ability to read facial cues comes from. And then the nucleus accumbens, that 6th region. Part of the pleasure reward pathway. It's where one of the places dopamine is fired from. It's how we know marijuana is addictive. Anything that activates the nucleus accumbens has the potential to be addictive. That's why you don't get addicted to things like antibiotics. And did people really think about that? Why do we get addicted to some and not to others? This is one of those reasons why. So in summary, for all ages, marijuana slows down movement, can make users unstable, memory gets diminished, emotional growth can change, and relationships can become more difficult, and kind of diminishes. And then this last thing, anger and violence can really increase. If you find that an interesting topic, this book, Tell Your Children by Alex Berenson, is really good. This belief that marijuana is the chill drug, there's really another side to that that's important to understand. All the erratic violence that's going on in our country may have some of its origin here. So let's talk about teen brains specifically. There's that narrative out there that we don't have enough research on marijuana, we've got to deschedule because of that. Well, more research is always good, but we have tens and tens of thousands of research with marijuana, and particularly with young adults, we know a lot, like they can experience, really anyone can, an immediate psychosis or psychotic break. There is strong evidence that marijuana is causal in schizophrenia. And then we see real IQ loss. And that 8 points for young people in the study that's kind of that really uncovered this is showing that doesn't come back when it's for young people. They're seeing some evidence that it comes back when that happens to older people. But 8 points is a lot. IQ is in 15-point increments. So you can be above average IQ, kind of mid above average, and drop into below average with an 8-point loss. It's pretty serious. We see emotional harms, increases in anxiety and depression. Amotivational syndrome is a real syndrome that's in the DSM-5 that doctors can diagnose, and it's probably an affectation of the amygdala, where kids really lose their motivation and their zest for life, and the things that energize them at one point in time stops. And the most disturbing is that we see serious increases in suicide attempts among young users. Physical things, harms like smaller brains, that vomiting syndrome is becoming more common, hyperemesis, and this idea that you can ingest a toxin and nothing is going to happen to you has always been silly. That's never been the case. And we've seen all kinds of lung issues and heart issues and stroke among users for a long time. There's fetal damage. THC crosses the blood-brain barrier, it crosses the placental barrier, and we see cancers of all kinds, particularly in the reproductive system. So there's two big questions if you're a parent that most parents, if they're in conversations with their kids, will throw out at them. And one is, is marijuana addictive, or marijuana isn't addictive? And it is. And NIDA even says about 30% of marijuana users, people have used in the last 30 days, have some kind of substance use disorder. We also know it's addictive because of that nucleus accumbens. Meets all kinds of criteria for biological addiction: tolerance, withdrawal symptoms, continued use despite negative consequences. And this one, marijuana is lipophilic. When I'm talking to teens and adults, really, I always say, okay, if you don't remember anything else I say, remember this. It is such a unique characteristic of this drug, and it explains so much, and nobody knows it. So lipophilic means fat soluble. And let me just explain how that works. Alcohol, in contrast, is water soluble. Person drinks, the alcohol goes to the brain, they get drunk. Within 24 hours, that alcohol is carried to their excretory systems, like sweating, peeing, breathing, and that alcohol leaves their body. When a person gets high, so they use THC, the THC gets in their bloodstream, goes to their brain, makes them high. While they are still high, their body starts pulling the rest of the THC out of their blood and depositing it into the fatty tissues around their body. Once they're done being high, again, their bodies are more in stasis, they're less stressed. The body will start leaching that THC out of the fatty tissues back into the bloodstream to be carried to those excretory systems: peeing, breathing, sweating. That is the tiniest little level of impairment. And a person experiencing it is not going to seem high. They're not going to feel high, most likely, but that will show up in a drug test. So it's considered a metabolite form of THC. And if you've ever heard someone say they smoked like a week ago or 2 weeks ago, and they're showing up positive on a drug test, this is why. Now, we have pilots and other kinds of people in our society that end up taking these really sophisticated memory and physical tests to make sure they're safe to do their jobs. This low level of impairment can show up on those kinds of tests too. So it's not nothing, but it's just a really interesting dynamic to understand about the drug, and the drug accumulates. So if you use and then that THC doesn't clear your system and you use again, it just layers on top. So you'll hear some people and kids that are in treatment that don't pass a drug test for like 30 and 40 and 60 days once they get there, because there's such an accumulated load. All right. The second question is, can I die or overdose from marijuana? And this one is interesting. It's a yes/no question. So marijuana does not shut down the brainstem like other drugs that kill via overdose. So no, you don't die from a THC overdose necessarily. Remember those 6 regions? The brainstem was not one of them. Yes, you have CB1 and CB2 receptors on your brainstem, but not enough for it to shut down the brainstem. Those drugs that kill that way literally shut down your breathing or shut down your heart rate. Alcohol and opioids can do that. That said, you can overdose on marijuana like crazy. That vomiting syndrome is an overdose state. Psychosis and psychotic breaks is an overdose state. People go to the hospital all the time because of their marijuana use. And in those psychotic states, suicide, homicide, and accidental death happen, and we hear about it. The other thing about that is horrible. But the other thing that's horrible is that people that experience psychotic breaks, only about 50% of them return to their pre-break normal. It's a really life-changing experience. The other way people die through marijuana is through traffic fatalities. And in every state that's legalized, traffic fatalities have gone up considerably. One note, if you're mixing alcohol and marijuana, there's about an 8-time increase in impairment. Those two drugs are doing different things in your brain. You add them together and they have this outsized effect. So in conclusion here, adolescence is supposed to be this great time. It's messy. I mean, like I said, got your kids. I've been there. It's messy. It's not easy. And for some people and some families, it's messier than others. But it's an important phase of development. Kids are supposed to figure out what fires off dopamine in their brains, what's important, what motivates, what unmotivates them. And marijuana gets in the way of all of that. Okay, so real quick, some forms and potencies about marijuana. The main thing to say is that this drug is not anything like it was when we were in high school. There are 4 major forms today. The first is the plant form. And if anyone used marijuana as recently as the 1990s, they consumed about 3% THC. Today, there is nothing on the market in plant form less than 18%, and most of it's in the mid-20s. So at baseline, this drug is 6 times stronger than anything most adults in a teenager's life would have used in their childhood. We also now know how to extract the THC out of the plant, get rid of the plant body, and we have liquid and solid concentrates. These did not exist before. Liquids are what are being vaped, solids are being dabbed. The national brand of THC concentrates for vaping boasts 85% THC in their vape cartridges. It's massive. And then dabs are almost 100% THC. Again, massive. Those concentrates can be added to foods and drinks. And so we have this new class of products called edibles. And really those concentrates can be added to anything. And we end up with THC infused lotions and salves and tinctures and patches, just on and on. Some pictures. This is plant form. The dried flower is what's put in joints and bongs. That other picture is 6 marijuana plants growing. Most states that legalize it's legal to grow a certain number of plants at home. 6 is what's legal in California. We have an open vaping system and a closed vaping system. Open uses those little vials of liquid. Closed uses pods of some sort that are pre-filled. Juul is our major vape system. It is a nicotine-based system. There are THC-based systems as well. This is a picture of a solid if you haven't seen it. It takes on a lot of different forms. Sometimes it'll be crumbly or glass-like. It's called butter, shatter, wax, all kinds of silly names. That thing to the left is what's called a dab rig. It's a way you can consume it. And then edibles, just a couple pictures of edibles. They can really, be anything. And a couple of the problems with edibles is when you eat THC, the THC has to go through your digestive system before it gets to your bloodstream. So there's a delay in the high. And so novice users don't understand that. Lots of people end up in the hospital because of it. Another problem is there's just massive amounts of THC in these products. That 420 is a chocolate bar, has 420 milligrams of THC in it. That Korova cookie above has 1,000 milligrams of THC. It's just crazy. And depending on the extraction process, there may be no smell or no taste to the THC, so it can be very dangerous. So if there's any doubt about marijuana, make no mistake, our last Surgeon General did officially come out and say no amount of marijuana is safe for adolescents or pregnant women for all the reasons we talked. However, the cannabinoids just keep coming. Delta 8 and hemp. In the 2018 Farm Bill that defined hemp, it defined it as a marijuana plant with less than 0.3% THC in it. And there's 2 problems with that. That 0.3% was by weight, which means when you get to a finished product, they can have massive amounts of THC in them. And also, marijuana has lots of cannabinoids in it. THC delta 9 is one of them. CBD is a second. There's hundreds. And so there are other cannabinoids in that plant that are psychoactive or that can be derived in a lab. Because the Farm Bill did not contemplate those and it is considered silent on everything but THC delta 9 and CBD, these other cannabinoids are being allowed. They are very strong. They are very addictive. They are in our gas stations. They are in convenience stores. They are just out there. So we have this kind of tacit overall legalization. Okay, more reasons why we need to talk to our kids. So back to our points, talk early and talk often. It has always been our responsibility to help our kids navigate alcohol and drugs. With legal weed, there's no neutral position on pot anymore. If you're quiet, your kids are going to assume you're okay with it because the rest of the world seems to be okay with it. And now with fentanyl, which we're not talking about today, it can be deadly if we're silent and not helping our kids understand this thing. So the good news and all that, if we can find some, is that our influence as parents really, really, really matters. And if you have teenagers at home, which it sounds like many of you do, they are masters at telling us our input and our opinions and our influence in their life is not wanted and not welcome. My teens certainly did. But in fact, children whose parents talk to them about the risks of drugs and alcohol use those substances about 50% less than parents who are not talking. Also, we hear that 80% of young people say that their parents are the leading influence in their decision to drink or not. So how do we make that influence count? So first of all, some tips and techniques, and the basis for all of this is, as parents, we have to find our authentic voice and the right approach for our families. It's going to be different for every family. It's lots of times different for each kid in the family. Be informed, get credible information like we're doing now, like the One Choice 5 is trying to provide, be in conversation with our kids. There's all kinds of effective listening skills out there that really help create a space to have a conversation with your kids. Role play, what ifs, code words, what would happen if, your best friend showed up with a gummy at the sleepover this weekend? What would you do? Code words are really helpful. Usually younger high school kids and middle school, if they get into a difficult situation, they need to get picked up, something that some way in which they can call you and say, hey, I'm in trouble without saying it out loud, and that they need your help is important. Those really work, like I said, for younger high school. As kids get older, a little less so, we find. And then adult modeling. And this always kind of makes the parents in the room are really a little squeamish. But let me just say, your glass of wine on Wednesday night does not justify your child smoking weed on the weekends. We hear that all the time. Well, you use, what's the big deal? Well, it's a big deal for every reason we've been talking about. That said, our behavior does influence our kids. So if you want to do a quick check on what you're modeling relative to drugs and alcohol, we have this thing called the Stress Joy Social Check-in, and this flyers in those handouts. But essentially what this says is look at the events or the moments in your family's life that involve stress, joy, or sociability. Is that a word? And if those always include alcohol or drugs, this is not an indictment on your life, but consider adding some that do not, so that your kids can see a wider variety of how to celebrate, how to express happiness, and how to deal with stress. Verbalize your emotional processing. Our kids are not seeing that as often now. We do so much processing online these days. Walk into the house, I've had a bad day, I'm going for a walk, versus just grabbing a bourbon. Come back, report, okay, that worked, or that didn't work. Someone handled dinner. I'm going to go take a bath and see if that calms me down. Let them see you process. Validate when you see them processing well. If you see their resilient behaviors, play that back so they can see evidence of their own coping mechanisms. Exercise your parental right to know. When kids get into high school, lots of us get a little squirmy, right? We want to give them their space, and that is good. But because of all that brain development that we've heard about, we still need to be involved. It's appropriate to call families that are throwing parties and saying, hey, I hear you're having a party. Anything you need to know? You need any help? You're going to hear, oh, didn't know we're having a party about 30% of the time. So you've done a community service, whatever. If you hear that the party's going on, you want to ask the next question. So are you going to allow alcohol or drugs at the party? And about 30% of the time, you're going to hear, yeah. We're going to take everybody's keys, and we want everybody to be safe. And so what have you accomplished by knowing that? Quite a bit. In that moment, you can proselytize with that parent if that's your style. Ooh, I'm not really sure that's a great idea. What are you thinking? Or, okay, thanks. Let me just let you know, my kids are not allowed to drink. I expect them to abide by that, but I just wanted you to know. Or just get off the phone, right? And now you've got information for you and your kid. And again, what do you want to do with it? You can do anything with it. What's authentic? You can be like, there's drugs and alcohol at this party, you're not going. Or it's not who we are. No. Or you could be, okay, I think they're going to allow drugs and alcohol. What do you think? And come up with a plan. Or got a good friend who's like, this is a life skill. You've got to know how to be at a party and not drink. How many times is that going to be a situation in your adult life? People may or may not agree with that, but she's like, okay, you can go. You do not have my permission to drink. I'm here. I'll be here when you get home. Let's remember when the curfew is, whatever it is, 11, 11:30, 12. I want to talk with you when you get home. And lastly, stay connected to other parents. Sometimes we call this parenting peer groups. This is most generally, it is the parents of your kids' friends. Know them, be connected to them. It's a great place to go if you're getting nervous. Okay, what's happening Saturday night? Where are they going? Whose house? What is this? Sometimes your kids don't know, and just beating on your kids for this information just is not useful. Sometimes the parents know more. It also can just reduce your anxiety in general and make you a more effective parent. And these people in your life can understand your feelings about drugs and alcohol, that you don't want your kid drinking, that you want to know if anyone sees your kid drinking or using. Lots of parents never say anything because they don't know. Am I getting the kid in trouble? And they don't know what to do. Also, you can share family history of addiction if that exists, so that these people understand the danger that your child is in. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay, so all of this is about communication goals. You want to set an expectation of no use. If that is not going to play in your family, this concept of delay is what a lot of parents are using today. Not ever, but at the right time, in the right way. Now is not the right time. So we're delaying this. And sometimes it's helpful to help your kid find a bigger reason to say no. I mean, more of who they are, what they like, what's important to them, what they want to accomplish in life. This is a Friday night. This is 2 hours on a Friday night. Really? That subsumes everything else. Well, it can. They're pretty focused on their peers and fitting in, but it sometimes helps just to expand the conversation. And lastly, we like to offer some frames of reference. This is a hard conversation. It's very easy for me to sit here and talk about strategies, but I don't think I know a family that's got through their junior year without having a pretty intense conversation, if not all out war on this topic. And so some other things to bring into it. One is the reason we feel this way as parents is because we understand how unique they are in the world, and that we don't want anything to change that. We don't want anything to disrupt that or derail that. Drugs and alcohol have the potential to derail. We also, when it comes to marijuana, we're not going to be naive about this. Market commercialization, this is tobacco 2.0. This is a huge multi-billion-dollar industry that doesn't care about social justice, that doesn't care about individual rights. They do not care about users. They like young users because they become addicted and become lifetime users. And also family history. So if there's addiction in the family, it is important to know that kids with addiction in their family are at a 50% greater risk of becoming addicted themselves when they use young. And this is hard. Addiction in family is hard. Everyone's at different places in terms of understanding it or recognizing or willing to talk about it, but it can be quite prophylactic. Plenty of kids are out there saying, I can't drink, I'm at a greater risk than you are. Not in every situation, it's not going to solve every problem, but it's a great tool to have in the toolkit. Okay, so if we're talking about talking, want to return to some of these ideas in the very beginning. This idea of we turned out okay, or kids will be kids, what's the big deal? So if that is true, if we used in high school and we do not have substance issues and or our life is not less than, we believe it could be, then that's great. We're in the right side of the statistics, and that is great. We encourage all parents who have that experience, though, to look back a little deeper and a little longer. I have not yet met a parent that has done that and not remembered, oh yeah, that friend that did end up addicted, or those friends that like disappeared, like just fell off the face of the earth. There is carnage back there. Not everybody got out unscathed. So kind of just bring that into the thinking as well. This idea that it's better if my kids use at home, not in the streets. I want to keep them safe. Always have to say, I really admire the intent of this. Parents are trying desperately, who subscribe to this, to find a balance, to make some part of this really difficult topic under control and to try to make a difference. That said, it's important to add some additional thinking to this thinking, and let me just offer some of it up. One is, it's illegal. You cannot serve alcohol, marijuana, or nicotine to someone in your house that is under 21 that is not your child, okay? So there's real civil and criminal risks. Most communities have social host laws that apply fines if they see big parties. And then again, I don't know a parent that does serve other kids that's ever thought about the mental health issues of the children in their home. If kids who have addiction in their family are at a 50% greater risk of addiction themselves, serving them is really dark, and no one thinks about that. So we're here to talk about that, right? Lastly, this question about minors using alcohol in particular has been a question that's been kind of rattling around society for decades, and so much so that the NIH did a meta-analysis of 22 studies and published all the findings in something called Providing Alcohol for Underage Youth. What messages should we be sending to parents? Okay, so that's in the flyer set. And what they found is that kids that were allowed to use at home drank more often, and drove after drinking more than the kids that were not allowed to drink at home. So allowing kids to drink in your house, yes, it might keep them safe for a night, but if the longer term goal is their safety, it's probably counterintuitive. Lastly, I can teach my kids to drink responsibly. I think we've kind of gone through this. They're not wired to use drugs responsibly. They're wired for risk-taking and emotional connection, being part of a crowd. Teaching responsibility is not really a thing. And then this one, my kids need to learn how to drink before they go to college. This is another one. I really appreciate and understand the intent here. And yes, so many of our kids are going to be faced with drinking and or start drinking in college. And there is an intuitive sense of, I don't want them to be in danger. So a couple thoughts. One is, lots of kids go a little crazy when they hit college just because of newfound freedoms that they didn't have before. And so we want to just keep an eye on that in general, because no matter what they did or didn't do in high school, this can be the case. We also have a really pretty considerable body of research that says even if kids start using in college, the outcomes of those kids that start in college are significantly less negative than the kids that show up and having used in high school and continue using in college. So showing up to college with a zero tolerance experience in high school really can be prophylactic. There's another school of thought that says the experience of abstinence helped all of those skills grow, right? So what is college but meeting new people, uncomfortable situations, a little bit embarrassing? If you've had some experience with that without drugs and alcohol before you get there, you are likely to be better able to navigate those when you get to college. Okay, so I'm gonna run fast, getting close. The last point, the fifth point, act quickly if you suspect use. And that is because there is so much at risk. And no, not every child that drinks or drugs in high school is going to have a problem. A lot of us are examples of those kids that did and don't have problems. Some of us are not examples of those. But Some of us are examples of this. Most adults that struggle with addiction or substance use when they're older started when they were young. In fact, substance use is seen as a pediatric onset disease now, with 90% of adult addicts having started before they were 18. And this chart shows that roughly 30% of our 16 and 17-year-olds that are drinking today may suffer when they get older. So every kid that is using in high school is increasing the risk of adverse consequences. And again, risk isn't definitive. Risk is the potential of problems. Addiction, like we've already talked about, and then mental health issues. We have this narrative that kids who start using heavily are using because they're medicating an underlying mental illness. Well, that very much may be true, and you want to deal with and address that mental illness in a more productive kind of way. The other thing, though, is it is equally as true as they may be causing their mental illness that would have never shown up if they hadn't been drinking or drugging when they were young. There's greater incidence of sexual assault and violence with young users, both perpetrator and victim. There's impaired driving, there's decline in academic achievement. There's all kinds of criminal and legal issues that these kids can encounter. All of these drugs are illegal for them. If you're under 21, you're not supposed to smoke anything or drink anything. And Bob DuPont, who is the founder of IBH and that One Choice program, sums it up pretty nicely. There is no problem so bad that alcohol and other drugs can't make it worse. So it's something to keep in mind. So we just want to finish, last slide, back to the more positive idea of the opportunity of adolescence. Kids are supposed to be growing up and developing these skills, and we want to help them develop these skills because that's what sets them up for adulthood. That said, if you or your child are struggling, please, please, please get help. The days of shame around this topic are over. The number of families whose kids are experimenting or struggling or spiraling down fast, there are so many of us out there. And if we can be more in conversation about it, if we can be asking for help, it's just going to make everything better for everyone. Okay, there's some resources to end with. And like Laura said, there's a handout with some other resources. Also in that handout is a survey. I would love it if you guys could take a minute to tell us about that survey or answer it, because this is a new framework and we're working on, how to present it, how to get it out there. Are people finding it relevant and important? All of those kinds of things. So if you could fill out that survey, it'd be great.
Thank you so much, Debbie. Appreciate that. Oh my gosh, as always,
I know.
Facts, information, knowledge. We should have a contest if anybody can speak faster than you. That's incredible. Thank you for getting all of that in. No, please, it was amazing. I have zillions of notes all over the place. There are a few questions if we just can take just a second. One question is, I have heard that marijuana can cause ED or erectile dysfunction, and heard that it suppresses testosterone, can actually impact teens who may want to get married and have families in the future. Is that another risk factor that you've come across?
We have, and it's back to those CB1 and CB2 receptors. You have a lot of those, and I think it tends to be the CB2 receptors in the reproductive system. So yeah, we see a lot of impact. Exactly what you said, testosterone levels less, erectile dysfunction. There's a horrible body of evidence about comedogenicness of this drug, where you can affect the DNA of your offspring if you were using. I mean, there's not a lot of good news there at all.
Okay, awesome. And one parent asked, what do you say when someone offers you marijuana? How do we coach our kids? I think they were picking up on one of your slides offering advice. Do you have something standard you can tell us to role play if we're trying to teach them? If someone hands them marijuana at the party, what do they say?
Yes, resistance strategies are a great thing to explore. If you Google resistance strategies, lots of different sources will come up. What What I find and hear from parents is, there's some common ones like no. I know so many kids when I say, okay, what do you say? They go, I say no, thanks. They'll change the subject. They'll suggest something else. Lots of kids will say, my parents drug test me. I can't. There are kids, I know a lot of kids who are like, I'm at risk. I'm not using drugs. I've got too much, drug use in my family. Not surprising. I do have a lot of drug use in my family. And my daughter had this like 30-second elevator speech where she would just run through the litany of just craziness in our family. And they would, her friends would literally be like, oh my God, yeah, no,
You're not
don't,
using.
no,
Yeah.
no, I'm taking that beer from you right now.
I love it.
Um, and it progresses as they age is what we find. And every one of my kids, lots of kids that I work with, they get to 11th grade and it's like kind of worked in 9th and 10th, and they get to 11th and they're like, I want to be here. I want to be with my friends. I don't want to leave. I don't want to be the designated driver. All those kind of strategies worked. And I don't have a magic answer for you, but it does seem that the more connected the child can be to who they are and what's important to them and where they're headed in life in the next week, this summer, whatever time
Careers,
frame,
sports,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
Okay.
all that helps put dimension around this person going, here, try this.
Right.
And it's also a great thing to just kind of brainstorm with them. Okay, how are you going to say no? What makes sense to you? And if you start to see kind of ideas bubbling up, playing those back to them can be really powerful.
Awesome. Those are great pieces of advice. Thank you so much. All of the other comments are all saying, thank you, such good information, so good with a lot of O's. And I will echo that. Appreciate all that you do for Johnny's ambassadors in the past, now, and in the future. Debbie Berndt, thank you so much for your time and talent today.
Thank you, Laura. Everybody take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.